I let things lapse a couple of days actually for shopping, which is incredibly taxing. And then I went for a walk yesterday and felt too fatigued to do much of anything. So anyway, what do we got going on? Builds on this new turn of the decade. A few people, Russia, North America, sending flybys up, get their robotic claimant Alpha Centauri. That's the easy part, but we don't want to not get that. And the turn could end next decade, or the game could end next decade. So we can't take a risk not to fill that out. I think Pakistan or Asia actually is not doing that. Oh, they've got one. They've got a couple of them coming into play here. So yeah, they've got theirs already programmed in. So they will get there in time. Whether or not they succeed, who knows? But they should manage. Well, I don't know. I mean, 11 turns, maybe not. And that one much further. Okay, beyond that, some people lifting stuff, but most of them not building military ships. The only military ship I think we had built is the Russians built this one. And South America refurbished their military ship, re-energized it, whatever. Otherwise, actually the push for most of the players is towards the exploration, colonization, etc. But the game may have entered a military stage that's going to be hard to get out of. First of all, because it's hard, you have to actually spend to get out of it if the diplomacy random die roll doesn't drift things away. But also, it generates good victory points, China's point of view, they're out of resources. They really can't afford this war anymore. There's not much they can do about it right now. They've got a big fleet coming in that's going to smack into the Japanese sitting there. They're stuck fighting, basically, or at least with a chance of fighting. They could fly away before Japan gets a chance, but then Japan would get an interception with their fleet, and it's fairly likely to happen when you've got big fleets like that. The Japanese have another warship coming in at the same time. And so that is going on. That is the Chinese fleet for the most part. The only question is whether this gets out, and it is not blockaded. That is that, isn't it? Yeah, I got to make sure that I'm not looking at the wrong base there. Now the EU is still blockading that one, so that's correct. And nobody else should be blockaded right now. We have additional fleets in the Russian ship that's taking off from here will be able to meet those ships at the same time, that are going to be able to land, make strikes on this Chinese base, which has been kind of their big military base. So they're in a lot of trouble. And if they throw up a blockade, that's going to be a problem during production, etc. That ends up reducing production and reduces settlements. It causes all kind of issues. Unless the war ends before that. Which can only happen, through the diplomacy mechanism. All right, so now to the just programming things moving along and the rest of the movement. China decided to take a jump on the initiative so that they could pull the ship from their base in at the same time, and they're actually launching an attack. If they win the battle, that protects this base. If they win it well enough, it causes a lot of interesting things to happen in terms of repositioning things. They're outgunned though, and they lost the initiative by 1 point. Now, this was a situation where both fleets were going to find each other. There was no way the die rolls could avoid that because there's so many ships involved that they're just going to create a big enough signature. But you still got to roll the dice for the modifiers. I'll be back in a bit. This took ultimate defense. The Chinese were wiped out, basically. They have one ship with 2 hits on it. They killed one Japanese ship. this is effectively the end of the war. The rest of it is just going to be, hey, how much do we want to make China pay in terms of smacking their bases around? Our warships don't serve much more purpose other than, you know, doing that. I haven't allocated the points. I expect it's going to be quite high, and they should be over with Japan. Oh well, I could have calculated it out and seen what the likelihood was and said, oh, I don't want to fight this. But, you know, I'm not good at advanced planning of that nature a lot of times. Yeah, sometimes you just got to see what's going to happen. I did not realize just how big the difference was. It was 32 strength points to 26, which might not seem like that huge a difference. The die rolls were nothing too exceptional, but the Japanese were able to reduce their damage by 4, which meant they took 9 points of damage down to 5, which is the cost of one ship. Whereas, if you look, boy, the damage rating starts getting high the higher you go, and then also you have less defensive drones or whatever, or offensive drones, because you're a slightly smaller fleet. The Japanese ships are pretty kick-ass, to tell you the truth. Problems with that preemptive attack, beyond losing my fleet, what recovered would still be attackable. And, you know, I mean, I could just surrender anyway. But as it stands, there's no harm to surrendering. It's a fatigued ship and can't be beat up. But the advantage to that is, no matter what the ordering, and I guess that would happen either way anyway, the Japanese, well, no, it wouldn't. The Japanese couldn't leave without the Chinese getting a chance to intercept them. So if the Chinese had won the battle, they would be in a very strong position where they'd be able to mop up remaining ships or something like that. It didn't work out that way. Maybe if there had been a significant swing in the firepower, but I think the Japanese fleet was bound to do a lot of damage. The only question is, would the Chinese fleet do nearly as much? And the answer is no. They would have needed a massive roll. So I don't think there are any other Chinese ships that I'm moving, because again, I'm doing the movement with, or doing combat within movement. So, and I don't think anybody wants to get a jump on anyone else, so we can just rewind over to the EU and let them start. Actually, worse than I thought. The Japanese don't have to accept the Chinese surrender. They're fully at war. I forgot, EU and Chinese and Japan are fully at war with China. EU did have to accept a surrender of the Chinese base, which reduced the materials. Hey, I don't get anything, but it's worth hurting somebody who's in the lead. And they still kind of are. They got 30 victory points sitting on them. You know, Japan only made it up to 11 at this point, most of which they just got off this battle. And for the remaining stuff that I've taken care of, North Americans bombarded the Jihui, mainly because I'm there, and why the hell not? If I can find them, yeah. It was kind of a, okay, I could fly on somewhere else, but what am I going to do anywhere else? These are warships. Let's just keep wiping the Chinese around a little bit. And the Japanese took a search for this. This is what I forgot. They took a search on this ship and trying to catch it, but it got a good enough die roll that it evaded the Japanese fleet. And so that was a more valuable option than going after this ship, which they also could have forced to fight, even if the base surrenders. But the base probably wouldn't surrender. It's got a 7-point defensive boost on it, so actually attacking that thing is probably not exactly safe. And cost for being so far, being away from the game for a little while, I gotta mark Pakistan, Asia, whatever, a little differently. They actually did their exploration during movement. I don't know, you know, I got so excited about the combat that my patterns aren't well developed, and that ship. Some metal and stuff there, and this was actually destroyed. Actually, a number of depletions this turn. Out here, and Neptune. Onto the bases. And with that, the turn's over. Most of the building focused mostly on, getting settlements up and such not. Nobody's really looking at, I got to get my military bases built up right now. The idea is to get my production up for next turn. If you do happen to have military base potential just about around the corner, though, it might not be a bad idea to produce it just before the decade, because, that's when, especially if you look like you're in the lead or if you think you want to enter a war, that's when you have to make that decision. Is, well in advance of when you actually start deploying your military. I'm too lazy to go out and do yard work or walks or anything like that today. So, however, I'm also kind of too lazy to play much, but I did force myself to come up here, play a turn. I'll probably get another one in. Who knows? Might even get done with the decade if we're lucky. I doubt that today, more likely tomorrow. But I would like to get this moving along so we can get towards the end. Unfortunately, I started reading a book, and I want to do that more than anything else. I love reading more than anything else. I tend to spam and hang out online and watch videos and stuff like that way too much, and play computer games, and it's hard to motivate myself to get up here and do this. I'm not sure what's all behind that and why it's so tough for me right now. It's not just the game. In fact, right now I'm a little more excited because, hey, the war is kind of ground to a halt for the next few years of the decade. And this is the thing, the game really, mentioned this before, follows this sequence, this cyclic pattern, where the first few years of the decade are really, really intense, the next few less so, and then towards the end there's almost nothing to happen. Just like at the beginning of the game, money runs out. The war definitely triggered that. There's a couple of players who still have enough cash they could do more exciting things, but everybody's basically just lifting shit up to their bases, with the exception of China, who is bankrupt and pretty much destroyed for this decade. However, they're still quite possibly winning the game. It might be necessary for everyone to just try to grind them down further and hold them back for another decade and prevent them from expanding further because of that huge victory point lead that they got from their war with the EU. And the EU did not do too poorly off of it. They didn't do great, but they made up a lot of ground on their own victory points. The full effects of the war aren't over. The Chinese had to jump in and move first in order to slip away from the Japanese, and they were able to do that. Maybe they would still be able to if they outroll the Japanese, but that's a crapshoot, really. And the Japanese actually have a bonus, having missiles here. All I've got is my base. Now, again, theoretically the base can avoid combat. I just don't buy that makes sense, so I'm throwing that concept out, which means the Japanese can launch an attack on it. The EU already launched an attack with a surrender, destroying the rest of the resources here at Tiangong. And now the Japanese are going to launch an attack on this one major remaining military outpost that has a couple of Chinese ships that it's trying to protect. Well, maybe I should have been dismantling ships and destroying them or something. Ships are the most valuable resources in terms of getting victory points, so the Japanese are going to target them. The Chinese destroyed this, doing 4 points of damage, -1 for losses. However, we are up here on the 22 level against the Chinese. Take 2 losses off for missile defense. That puts me at 20. That's a whole lot. This can take one of that 20. And I'll figure out the rest, but we may be losing a good deal of our base component there. Obviously, the defensive station, an important thing to get rid of so we don't have to keep fighting it. And that's expensive. That's worth 13 right there. And doesn't get me any victory points. But the next thing is probably wiping out settlements. Although it might be destroying the refinery or knocking that down if I can. Won't really have that many points. But settlements are worth victory points. And we had to refresh the engineering cup because of the losses. And you can see there is some sort of reward for losing all those ships. It doesn't make up for shit, really. Now we're blockaded, the defenses are all gone, and this is just another sitting target, which the Japanese will take the last remaining resources from. Can't trade with it, can't do anything. All I can do is blow up those 2 resources, I guess. I might want to be considering, do I need this big a fleet? You know, but I am at war, and we don't know if I'm going to be able to get out of that war, and who else is going to be able to get out of the war, if anybody's going to declare war on us. Japan does not look like they're in the kind of position China was in, where people really wanted to take out some aggression on them. No. I don't know who else is. China's big pile of victory points was exceedingly frightening. Nobody else is sitting, and they got that out of Europe. Nobody else is really sitting on that many. Russia's got a big pile of missions. That's kind of scary. We don't remember exactly what the points are. And they're established. They've got all their bases. They can concentrate on stuff. They're a possible target, but we don't know. Anyway, we'll continue with the rest of the movement. Turns are mercifully short, and I like that at this point, because I am getting, the fatigue of a long game. However, it is kind of disconcerting still. The turns were super, super long, because of the military especially. And now, well, the military is largely resolved. There ain't a lot left I can do to the Chinese. They have a couple resources left and nothing else they'd lose, and I won't gain anything from killing them. So you kind of leave them alone for the decade. They had a few bucks. They could try to lift something. But so people are largely a little bit of exploration going on. Not much. There was a depletion here. I don't think any others. Chits, obviously. And somebody ought to set up a telescope again. And a lot of activity around building settlements. A couple people were in positions where they could start terraforming Mars. Not much value to that, unless you happen to be the one person, the South Americans, who were, I don't know if they have the technology. No, they're one of the people who do not have the technology. I think it was Japan, and who was considering either Japan or Asia, who had a lot of, supplies there. And they're like, well, yeah, it was Asia. And they're like, yeah, I got a pretty good number of settlements there. Let's compare it to everyone else. It might be worthwhile eventually, because, especially for South America, because someone like Russia is not heavily invested there. North America is not heavily invested there. Other people have a fair number of settlements there, and proportionally they get a value if they can terraform it. But those resources that you can build there are useful for other things, like just building settlements, So unless you end up with a lot of extra blue there, it doesn't really seem worth cashing in when everybody else is there too. Again, it depends. Yeah. Largely trying to push settlements out here. One exception, we've got the South Americans going into the Neptune race as well. This is kind of interesting because the war has slowed down the progression for most people. Russia is out of bases. They can't make it there. So all we've got there is North America. Fine, they've always been in the lead, in terms of bases. And of all places, Asia, who I believe was a little behind, actually. So like Japan, Europe, China, they've all lost ground. And Japan was heavily involved in this war and did not focus on expansion at all. And China and Europe have been fighting, for this their second decade. So 2 more turns until the economic. The 9th turn took up, I don't know, somewhere between 10 15 minutes. Probably right around 15 minutes to just breeze through. Almost nothing happened. Materials being boosted up, moved over, outward, and the bases, settlements being built up. We got a new base here, way out at Neptune for South America. That makes 3 powers, making it that far. And that's kind of the end of the line, I'm out of bases. If I had a shitty base, maybe I could take it apart, this one for example, but this one's worth something. It's past Saturn, therefore it's maximum points. No reason to be particularly out at Neptune. The only thing that's nice about Neptune is if I get a spaceport there, getting things moving out here. We're seeing warships moving out in this direction also. Why? Well, if I gotta have warships, I want to get them close to where they can do exploration. And the nearest exploration right now is this, but really the Kuiper Belt is the most reasonable place for it. Also, if there's no war, if the war fades away, I can decommission them and turn them into materials, that I can use further out where they're more valuable. So there's no real reason to have them in. Now that opens up an interesting little opportunity. The Japanese are still blockading this because they had one last attack to do. And, given that this is the last turn of the game, they probably are just going to stay there blockading it and reduce China's production. No one else is doing so though, like the EU pushing its fleets out, etc. Although if things are hitting places where Chinese fleets are, Chinese bases are, they might blockade just to hurt China a little bit more, hurt their settlements, etc. But China's not doing very well on settlements, other than a huge amount on Mars, well, a big amount on Mars, and a fair amount on Jupiter. They didn't go very heavily on the settlements. Not sure what they did. They got themselves a lot of victory points, but it wasn't all through military, so, whatever. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing this push outwards. The opening for China is the big production tends to be down here, and that means if China gets a decent amount of resources and transfers them around, they could build some warships. But they do not want to be in the situation they're in. 2 countries at war, 2 in blockade, whatever, what is it called, embargo, which allows full military action on everything, except that you have to accept surrenders by ships. If they choose to surrender. Have we had any situations where ships were threatened? No, the Japanese were threatening ships. But yeah, otherwise, we wanted our warships to try to win battles, etc. And it just, what happened, happened. There's presumably enough time I could actually finish up the last turn of the decade tonight. It's getting dark early nowadays, but even if I do that or not, I doubt I'm going to have the oomph to be able to do the economic phase. So, yeah, whatever. Hey, no shopping this week, no dancing anymore because of the COVID. So, I should find some time. And it's not like the game is over this next decade assured either. I'm getting kind of a drive towards, hey, the game's going to end. But honestly, this could run all the way out, But it's getting close. Yeah, it's getting within sight. I taste the blood. The decade's kind of a special time. You don't have to really do a lot of pre-planning here. Well, I mean, you have to do pre-planning for the turn, but not for other periods of the decade. You're just like, oh, I need this material here. Let me see what I got. Great. So it's a little easier on the brain than some of the other turns. But a lot's going on. A lot of materials moving up. Of course, the war is essentially on hold. There's nothing anybody can do to China because all their resources are gone. They're going to buy a bunch of fuel here, but that doesn't happen until the end of the turn. And, you know, they're going to get production there at the same time, although slightly reduced because of the damage. You know, that may provide them with a Mars, a nice base to build stuff at Mars. They can fling materials around. I'm not going to let them fling materials if I don't remember if the rules allow it or not. I don't remember if there's an exclusion is basically what I'm saying, but I'm not going to allow them to use their transport rules to go in and out of some place that's under blockade, but very little is under blockade right now. So, and there are no ships around Mars, no warships. The warships are all heading way out where they might be useful if the war ends. I think I forgot to mention the EU lifted up a flyby trying to get the Alpha Centauri points before the game ends. I don't think we're going to get a CB out there. If it hadn't been for the war, hey, maybe somebody would. If the game goes far enough, you know, but it's beginning to look iffy now. So the point is, make sure you don't lose 5 points to everyone else there. Other than that, the research station at the new South American base. Otherwise, largely settlement improvements. I don't think much else, not much focus on the military. And that is the end of the decade in general, but we still have the economic phase. And I think I'm going to just jump right in because the turn was short. Okay, first, everybody gets their diplomacy points, and you know, people who did exploration or maybe got points off combat or whatever have some nice points. China, who's in this horrible position where they want to get out of these wars, only has 2. That makes it harder. Losing a war puts you in a position where you can't surrender. It would be kind of nice if we were looking at this option where you could like surrender things, it would maybe make sense to say, look, take my base, it counts as this many politics points, you know, for whatever it means. And now, would anybody ever do that? I don't know. Maybe if a base is shitty enough or whatever, of course it would be worth less then. But, you know, to some extent, there's kind of this, yeah, you went out of the war, you gotta offer something. And as it's gonna stand, it's gonna be hard for China to get out of the war. And do other people really want to? You know, do they want to expend their politics points when they can just keep a running military? Sure, there's a cost to that. But if they can keep China down for the rest of the game, it's going to be a more painful situation. And China's going to have a hard time getting things. For events, we had 2. One is Mars got degraded. This was the survey error thing. A new card showed up that is just worse. It doesn't have the heavy production. We've tapped Mars out. Eat up all the resources on Earth, let's just keep going. And then the other event was hitting Ganymede, where everybody has a base, a natural disaster, which hits different people differently. First of all, it does a point of damage to everything. Okay, you know, that's going to reduce production a little bit, whatever, and require possible repair work. But more importantly, is some people had really large stockpiles of resources sitting there, and those got halved. Other people, like China, had nothing there. So, you know, there's kind of something neat and interesting happening there. Now we go to the initiative, and again, you know, you want to fight the war, you want to prosecute it completely, you got to spend politics chits. Did I change to doing the rules right? I believe I did, where I'm going to use this not as a percentage of where the bonuses that you get off of either the military advantage or off the military policy or off of your politics chits aren't 10% of your total, but rather 10 points added to your total, 40 points added to your total, whatever. which makes it a lot less variable, makes you able to control things more, makes spending them a more valuable decision. I hate doing the initiative. I don't know if anybody is all that gung-ho to do anything. The one interesting place out there exploration-wise is Pluto. Grabbing that before it expands is important. However, I don't think anybody is set up yet. Russia is too far away. This base is not the Neptune base. They don't have one. We got a large supply here that could actually support it, right? What do we got? No, those are CV4s. They can't make it out there. I thought CV3s were my main explorers. It is possible that there are some small ships kicking around here that could explore out there. And a successful depletion by one of those could get 5 victory points. That's a big hunk of change. That is worth pursuing. So, you know, but the initiative roll for that, probably not worth expending. And in terms of warfare, you know, we look at, I don't really think anybody wants to extend the war, you know, in terms of like, hey, we're at war with China. Let's also go to war with Japan, with Russia, who looks like they're doing pretty well at this point. Anyone else who's really kicking butt? Wow. Japan is too. So, I mean, there's some possibility that like South America or Asia might come into the war against Russia only. The problem is Russia has a fleet, and Asia certainly doesn't have much. I think South America has 1 ship. Asia may have 1 warship as well. It feels like it's better for them to just keep pushing on. And I mean, Asia's not doing that badly either. They have a pile of victory points. So I don't know if anybody's going to actually pursue the war. And we got some pretty big numbers up there, led by China with 144. Now, obviously, you know, when you're adding 50 to your die roll, your baseline is 50. You know, when you're adding 40, your baseline is 40, as opposed to before, where we would see, you know, rolls below 10 that are just way down there. On the other hand, everybody's so high that it's basically a crapshoot, and nobody was willing to spend political points. There aren't a lot of them out there. Japan has the most. And remember, well, they're only worth 2 each to everyone except Pakistan and South America now. So the fact that you're at war means that they're more valuable, but they're probably more important in terms of determining who you're at war with and who you're at peace with. So let the initiative fall where it will, right? There's no automatic peace effect. I forgot about this and made all my decisions before it, but then I rolled and lucked out and there wasn't one. However, South America, who had to make the first choice, talked to Pakistan, Asia, and decided, let's go for Russia. Now, that did not kick things off immediately, but then North America chose to spend a point to try to get out of the Chinese war, figuring if I can focus entirely on my own exploration and everything, everyone else maybe is in a worse, position because they're still fighting with China. I'm not getting victory points off China particularly. What the hell? And why do we want to just keep kicking them? Well, we want to keep kicking them because they have a big lead in victory points, but leave that aside. Maybe it's other people's problems. North America doesn't have a lot of victory points. Every other player who was at war with China has chosen to put points to get out of it. And China themselves is putting points to get out of the actual war state that they have with the EU and Japan. So we may see a completely different situation erupt here. Both South America and Asia have chosen to throw 2 points in against Russia, so there's a fair chance that there will be some hostilities there. Net impact, China ends up only in an embargo state with the US. And in fact, they've increased to free trade with the EU. Everything else got cleared there. Asia did not end up at war with Russia, but South America ended up in a full state of war. So that's not a good situation for South America. Russia is still fairly potent. Yes, they lost a whole fleet of garbage that they kind of engineered on purpose, but they have a larger starting fleet, and their resources are not significantly worse than South America's. In fact, South America is one of the people who took a heavy hit off the Jupiter incident. However, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see what happens. And that puts us to the big production stop. Number of installations, especially for nations that do not have a lot of CV and base production. Painful hit here. First of all, I'm at 6 bases. I can only have 3 that are paid for. 1 plus the 2 off the chart. Definitely upgrading that. So that comes out to be $18. And then I actually had a couple of extra CVs as well because I'm geared up for war, and I need to be. I'm still in a hostile situation. So all I have left is $22. I'm not used to that kind of crap money. My production was at 50, but yeah. Okay, so I haven't really been paying attention to what my transportation limits are. I know some people have better than others, but I don't know where it is. We have trade routes. Oh no, everybody's at 10 resources on their trade routes, and nobody's up to 15. Okay, great. So there's some capacity for trade, for moving resources around. So most of the people have chosen to produce what they can where they produce it best. There are a few exceptions. So Russia, who's involved in a war, chose to do so, but they were kind of tapped out. Well, not really. They had a lot of iron here, but iron's really important in the war, and they wanted to make sure they got materials elsewhere that they needed. So they're going to have to shift things around. They've got a fleet in play that's bigger than South America's. South America, on the other hand, was one of the people who chose not to do that. So they produced iron. They produced fuel here, actually, which is new. It's like the weakest thing they could produce, but they kept producing iron here, which is a specialization, and they, I believe, produced iron there as well, although that's sort of their fuel center. The reason being just the resources they had stocked around. Japan also went for a more, hey, let's balance things out. Just because I had so much blue stuff here, and it's not really that big an advantage, so I produced iron, which is a little bit less valuable. In terms of the tech chart, we got some people screaming up there with the bio. China with all its engineering because of all the ships they lost. Good thing they're still at war. Oops. And but they got out of most of them. And then sort of this centralized grouping elsewhere. The EU is really kind of falling behind in tech, and they're going to be struggling. Of course, that's going to be somewhat impacted by the initiative order. Nobody's got a ton of points left, and the only people who get bonus points right now are South America. They only have 1, and Asia has 2. But nobody has many. The one person who had like 5 was Japan, and they really wanted to get out of their war with China. So everybody basically spent politics points on diplomacy. So there we have that. I got to transport the resources. I don't know if I'm really in the mood to do that just yet, although this would be the time. This would be a good time because I've just done the production, but I need a break. Around my lackadaisical method of trying to figure out where my production is going to go and everything definitely put me at disadvantages in terms of getting things allocated where I want them. People who are not at war are not such a big deal. I can just push them towards the edges, whatever, and hope for the best on the chits, like that I get this big sale. and can make lots of money and just get rid of all that material on Mars. We have 3 pirates, one all the way here that somebody not at war will probably go hunt down. But the other 2, one at Mars and one over at Jupiter. And I've marked those on everybody's sheet just to indicate, hey, there's something going on there. Unfortunately, they're kind of a yellower color than I thought it was. I thought it was kind of orange. And since China's involved in a war, they might actually need yellow counters. Swap things out or whatever. Just to match the color of the nation. I could use red though. What the hell? Who else is red? And red will be a good alignment, matching their flag. And let's see, asteroids. We also had 3 asteroids, one out here. And again, these probably things that people who are not at war are going to go after, and 2 at Jupiter. They're victory points, but you know, it's just too dangerous to be sending you know, your CVs out unprotected, and probably want to dismantle the ones that aren't warships if you're in a war standing. That brings us down to the tech fund. Great. Okay, this is the hard part. After most people have made their first tech purchase, you know, the normal, hey, let's catch up, China finds itself in an interesting position. First of all, they're in the lead in every tech race there is, which isn't a big deal. I mean, people are conglomerated. They're not off on their own anywhere. But here's the problem. The thing they're best at, because of all the destruction, is engineering. They really don't want battleships available. They don't want to make it cheap for anyone. We are not even set up to build battleships. We're set up to build the smaller ships, because our smaller ships are almost as good as our battleships, and the extra iron cost isn't really worth it. Whereas the nation we're at war with, the North Americans, have really good battleships. So I want to make sure that they buy theirs first, which means I don't want to spend my engineering. I probably don't want to. I could conceivably get something like super heavy transport and increase the amount of lift I can create. Artificial intelligence I don't care about. I kind of don't care about battleships, to tell you the truth. But everywhere else I'm looking is really painful. In particular, I don't have enough physics points, I think, to buy anything. And bio, I only have 25, which means I would be spending. I don't have any politics. I don't have genetic engineering, so that's not even available. So I think what I'm going to do is go for the space heavy transport, which is kind of a weird choice, but I really don't want to see those battleships built. I screwed up with North America. I don't think I had enough points to get myself to battleships, although with nanotechnology I probably did, but I don't have a whole lot of cash kicking around because of the expenses of all the bases and everything I have there. Instead, I had bought the space elevators, which I need because one of the ships I'm planning on building is on Mars. So yeah, that's kind of an issue. If I didn't buy that, I bought nanotech. Yeah. That's what happened. I think I bought the nanotech, and then the Russians followed. I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm out of engineering points, so we're not getting to battleships with the North Americans, and they're definitely, we're looking forward to it. They don't have any big warships they can build, and their warships are way out at the edge of the galaxy. Well, at the edge of the solar system. Yeah. Wrong type of game. So, yeah. That's actually working nicely for China, although they didn't make it impossible for North America to get them. North America made it impossible for them to get them. The costs of the higher technologies and the war and other factors are making these choices a little harder. So like for the North Americans, they went for space medicine. Probably not what they would have gone for otherwise. They probably would aim for life support, try to get their capability to explore further out. They had the points for it, but the crew recall rate's more important because we're in a military situation. And the decisions are not the only thing that's hard. China having to give up at 25 points. They don't have genetic engineering is the hardest of the transfer ones to perform. I could blow a lot of cash, but I don't have that much cash to, make, say, something happen in physics, but it would be a lot of cash. And likewise, I certainly don't want to do it in engineering where I made the choice not to build the battleships. I'm not really interested in anything. But in physics, yeah, I might have been interested in the trade routes the EU has grabbed. That would be 26. I would get it for $19. But I don't know that it's that necessary. The only thing I'd be trying to get to is that better space medicine by delaying and not giving these materials up. And there's nothing cheap enough to buy, And a lot of people with a lot of leftover points. And on multiple levels. So you can see the Chinese have the biggest expenditure, but others have a large amount, and those are going to get halved, and that's really kind of sucks. But Russia kind of had the last option to do anything. That's why they're still there. They could have gone to genetic engineering and then paid about half their cash to get the recall rate. But I'm at war, you can't screw around when you're at war. You got to be able to get your materials up there. And the recall rate's the important thing. Genetic engineering, the only reason I'd be getting that is like to get an extra tack, victory point wise, whatever, but it's just not worth chancing right now. I need that cash to get materials up there and fuel my war effort. Everybody's kind of cash poor right now. China's probably the richest of all, and they're significantly material poor, so they're going to have to lift a lot of stuff, and they have no ships either, so yeah. Also, most of the politics markers that were left or that were available for the tech level were not used at all. Again, the jumps between a technology and the money that you get, it might be worth having cashed them in anyway to get tech before they get halved, because you get 1.5 tech, you only get $1 each. But again, everybody's so cash poor, a lot of people are at war. Screw it, we're just going to convert them to money. The settlements are getting quite large, and it's an interesting growth pattern, because as they get bigger, they just keep getting bigger and bigger. Now, eventually it doesn't really make much difference, but that eventually is beyond what I foresee happening. That 35, I think, is our biggest, but we got a few in the 20s. In terms of policies, the people who are at war shifted into the let's be good at war. The others all shifted into the let's be good at politics and get the higher tech value from it. It was a hard call for at least some of the people. I think it was Japan who was seriously considering going to get additional population roles. But, there's a lot of tech left to buy, and I think the victory point conversion on tech is a bigger deal. So unless I'm coming close to the edge of the entire tech tree, I think I want to get those extra things. The problem is the fact that we kind of didn't cash them in, that the number jumps are so big that maybe that isn't enough, is kind of painful. But on the other hand, most of the cases I can use money. And everybody can use money in physics and engineering, and everybody's getting kind of close, except for South America, in terms of the buyout to being able to cash money in which case those politics markers will save you cash towards making those victory conditions up. So it seems more valuable right now. There might come a point where, if the game lasts long enough. And I guess that's about it. I think, let's slide these forward. I think this goes to the 5 marker. I'm not absolutely positive. I think that's when I start checking to see, hey, did the game end? I don't remember the rules on that. No big shock here. We don't remember lots of rules. There it is. Oh, so we see 4. Well, we did. There we go. Okay, so in 2145, it's a 1% chance at the end of the game. Okay, so we're not really expecting to see it end, but it's possible it can. And I like that feature. I like the idea of not knowing when the game's going to end. It prevents you from being able to do last turn shenanigans, because you know that the game ends at that point. I don't know how we're gonna have to do calculations. I mean, early on, yeah, it's easy, but as we move forward, it's gonna be kind of painful to remember all our calculations. Certainly, this decade it won't be a problem, but the most there is a 5% chance. So we're looking at somewhere around an 8.5% chance of the game ending over the course of this decade. I wouldn't count on it. All right, let's send this one up. And, I am still enjoying. I know I'm having trouble coming up and playing. And I also, there's a nature of long games that's this weird sort of phenomena for me. And I don't know if it's true for everyone. It depends on how you play them. But I start out, I'm usually very excited. For this one, I had to get kind of into it a little bit, start understanding. Oh, one thing, I wasn't even aware that it was going to be anywhere near this long. Even starting to play it, it took me a couple decades to realize, yeah, I'm not going to be able to speed up the turns much more, and there are a lot of them. This is not a short game, nor is it a small game. I would say it's my first real science fiction monster in terms of taking up a lot of footprint and take, although in a weird sort of way. Hey, there's no map sheets at all. How can it be a monster? So anyway, what happens is you get that kind of started thing. You're excited. You want to see what's happening and everything, and then you hit a kind of doldrums period. And every now and then there's exciting little inflection points. And then towards the end, you're not really hitting those exciting points versus doldrums. It's more like doldrums versus I want to hit the accelerator and just fucking get there and get to the end. But it is still sort of an exciting, it is sort of a drive that pushes you on. And then as you get close to the end and you start realizing, you start feeling this kind of regret that oh, it's going to end already. And in the whole thing, there's sort of when you get towards that end, there's this sense of accomplishment. And, I'm just playing a game, right? But it happens with any game, with even a computer game or something, the actual completion of a long endeavor brings its own little dopamine boost or whatever, or something a little more. And it's just something that I don't get anything like this out of a game that takes maybe 20 hours. I don't get anything along the same lines. And once you start going over that, once you get into that 50-hour period for a game or something, it's just this entirely different feeling. And for people who, haven't experienced that or whatever, I'm hoping maybe they get, some of the understanding of why someone would spend so much time on a game, why they're not just playing Space Corp to get the same kind of story, a more abstracted version, or even High Frontier, which is a different focus. And I have no idea with all the expansion, when you're starting to go outside the solar system, what you're talking about. But I know that game always feels like, oh geez, I was just starting to get into the interesting stuff and it ended. Again, I don't play it with the full, the leaving the solar system stuff. But, yeah. Anyway, let's send this up.